The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Why are so many municipal politicians heading for the exit? And what does it mean for local democracy? It's Wednesday, September 7th, and we'll examine that next on the agenda. In big and small communities across the province, one notable thing about this municipal election cycle is incumbents deciding not to run again. With us now for some sense of why, let's welcome in Peterborough, Ontario, Mayor Diane Therrien. In Waterloo, Ontario, Mayor Dave Jaworski. And from City Hall in the provincial capital, Denzil Minnan-Wong, Deputy Mayor and Toronto City Councillor for Don Valley East. And we're delighted to have the three of you on our program tonight and get a better understanding of why. Well, let's go through a bit of a checklist here. Almost a third of Toronto City Council not seeking re-election. Half of Kingston City Council not seeking re-election. Mayors in Ottawa, Vaughan and Hamilton, at least a couple of whom surely would have been re-elected, not running again. And you three, not running again. So let's find out. Diane, how come?
Well, I mean, there's many reasons. It's been an extraordinarily challenging term. I think all of us can relate to. When we campaigned back in 2018, nobody foresaw a global pandemic that would sort of derail a lot of what we were hoping to achieve over the term. And so that's part of it. I mean, there's also circumstances unique to my experience in Peterborough with being a young woman and some of the challenges that I've experienced with staff and other councillors in terms of a level of ageism and sexism that isn't uncommon for young women in all workplaces, but in politics especially.
I should say you batted that back on Twitter so magnificently using a wonderful word that I can't repeat here, but captured a lot of attention, let's put it that way, on Twitter. Do you think that helped sort of put whoever was responsible for all that garbage in his place so that perhaps your successors can have a better shot at this?
I hope so. I mean, I did get such good feedback from people all over the country and the states too, saying we wish more elected officials would speak up against this kind of behavior. It's really toxic. It's really detrimental to democracy, and it shouldn't be tolerated. It should be called out in the strongest possible terms, which is, I guess, what I did.
Yes, you did. Dave Jaworski, how come you're not running again?
Well, Steve, it all started about 9 years ago when a friend asked me, why don't you run for mayor? And it all ended last December when another friend asked me, why are you still running? And the question why is always a great question. And in the first case, I decided I had a lot to contribute to the community. I call it the ultimate community job, being mayor. And in the case of why, reality is last September, I had my campaign theme all done. I was putting the campaign team back together, and then I started doing some self-reflection and thought, you know what? I didn't have any experience. I went straight to mayor and of a great city of Waterloo, and another person can do it. And we can pass the baton and have had 8 great years and to celebrate that, Steve.
Okay, but let me follow up. Clearly, you were ready to get the band back together again, take it on the road. But something must have changed to get you to change your mind. What changed?
Well, Steve, it's just reflecting on how much time it takes. This is a great job, but it's an all-encompassing job. And I think that that's something that you need to reflect on. None of us are getting any younger and have good opportunities to spend more time with the people behind me here and enjoy that. And the reality is I can still walk around town. Most people probably think I'm still mayor next year yet. So I'll have some great conversations and a lot to reflect on.
Well, I do hear from Mayor Bonnie Crombie in Mississauga that lots of people there still think that Hazel McCallion is the mayor, even though she hasn't been for quite some time. So yes, get ready for that. That's probably coming. You mentioned age. Denzil Minnan-Wong, how old were you when you first got elected?
30.
30. So you've been at this for a while. How come you've decided to stand down?
28 years. I've been on almost every major committee. I've been deputy mayor for 8 years, and so it's time. It was time for me to move on and seek new challenges. I found that, especially in Toronto, council and the public service are becoming more left wing. So you're seeing anything from the nonsense to renaming Dundas to defunding the police when we need more police to putting bike lanes everywhere and congestion rising. I want to spend more time with my family. I think you'd find that as a common thread amongst all of us. You never get that time back. And while I enjoy campaigning, going into campaign is particularly hard on families, and that also factored into my decision. Okay, but let me, we have to point out that a couple of the most prominent so-called left-wing members of Toronto City Council are also standing down, Cressy and Layton. So this is not you have difficulty with some of the things the left wing is doing. I'm sure they had difficulty with some of the things you were doing. So that's a common element. Is there anything particular about your, I guess, age and stage of life that has made you say, I've had enough of this? Well, after doing it for 28 years, Steve, you've pretty much done everything. So it's time to do something different. I think everybody has their own sort of formula for why they're leaving, and they weight different things in different ways. But fundamentally, they just want to do something different, and they may not be as, let's say, inspired when they started as when they're leaving. Gotcha. One of the things, Mayor Therrien, that I guess I have heard from so many municipal politicians in particular over the last couple of years is we never got elected to have to make the kinds of massive decisions that are connected to COVID-19, and that has just taken a much more significant toll than we had anticipated. So let me ask you, the COVID-related decisions that you and your council have had to make, and presumably a lot of the intense blowback that some of that has got you from some members of your community, how much of a factor was that in your decision?
Yeah, it was a bit of a factor. The decisions, a lot of them, as you know, came down from the provincial government. But COVID definitely exacerbated what was, a pre-existing sort of toxicity in politics, which has always been there. But the increased responsibility of dealing with COVID, we've also had, the windstorm and the May 2-4 long weekend that rocked Peterborough. So that was another state of emergency we had to declare. So there's been a lot, of extra workload. And I think that's a common theme across municipalities. We're dealing with not just COVID, but, provincial downloads and an increasing expectation from constituents that you're accessible all the time. There's so many ways to reach those of us that are on social media or, when I'm out walking the dogs and that kind of thing. And it becomes, as was said, an all-encompassing job. And, and COVID certainly didn't help that. And it's been very challenging. We know that, municipalities can't run deficits. COVID hit us all really hard financially. It's going to take us a long time to recover. So there's a lot of challenges in it, but there's, also a lot of other reasons why I chose not to run again. Sure. The three progressive women on Peterborough City Council, none of us are running again. So that also says something about the culture at City Hall and City Council here. Okay, follow up on that. What do you think it says? Well, it's just been extremely challenging to try to push some things forward without staff support. The role of councillor in Peterborough is part-time, as it is in most communities across Ontario, but it ostensibly part-time because it really is such a huge commitment when you have boards and committees and then, council on top of your constituent work. And then you're not actually able to push forward a lot of the policy development that you are elected on when you run on a platform and you talk to constituents about what they want to see, because our councillors have no administrative staff support, no research staff support. A lot of them work full time, and so then to try to put everything into City Council as well, they're just burnt out. Mayor Jaworski, how much did a once-in-a-century pandemic affect your decision to leave?
Well, Steve, I would say it wasn't really that stressful. What it was more frustrating and sad. And the reason why I say that is it's hard to make decisions when you have no data. I remember in the very earliest of the days after the state of emergency was declared in March of 2020 that we were talking about masks. And, we were concerned that, well, what could we do with masks? Would people now put them on? Would they understand that they can't touch their mouth with their fingers that are not clean? And then there was the issue of the the masks, were they readily available? Would it steal from what our medical services needs? There's a whole bunch of things that, the supply chain was crashing, goods weren't being moved. We didn't know if people know how to use them. And we had to make decisions on things like that throughout the pandemic that we're making with little or no data, sometimes just seeing what other jurisdictions did and trying it here. And that was, like I said, very frustrating. And then the deaths of our community. One thing as a municipal politician, we're the closest to the people. So when you're pushing the grocery cart or walking the dog, as you've heard, you see people who knew those people who died. And, it's very sad for the community, but we all need to get through it. And for me, that was the challenge there. But I would say in my first term, I did have the LRT construction of Waterloo Region, where it's like open heart surgery on your city. And that was a challenge. The second term was the pandemic. I said, you know what, I need to run again to have a good third term. And I realized, you know what, there's always going to be challenges. And it's really the time to pass the baton on things like climate change to a new mayor.
Gotcha. Denzel, I want to ask you, and in doing so, I'm going to assume you voted twice for Doug Ford in the last two provincial elections. And having said that, immediately after he got elected the first time, back in 2018, he doubled your workload, right? He cut City Council basically in half, going from 47 to 25 members, and the number of constituents that you had to serve pretty much doubled. I wonder what kind of contribution that made to your decision to leave this time.
It didn't. I have more constituents for sure. There was a bigger workload, but the workload didn't really affect my decision not to run or not. It was other things. So, for example, you were speaking what happened during COVID. I realized during COVID, because I got to spend a lot more time with my family, how much time I was away from my family. And I thought to myself, as we moved out of COVID back to a normal situation, that I didn't want to give that time up again, because that's time you never get back. I've got a young family. So the idea of the extra work didn't bother me. When you have twice as many constituents, you can't spend as much time with them. But you adapt. We got more staff. And so that really didn't have a significant impact on my decision. It was other things. This is,
admittedly, Denzel, a bit of a smart aleck question, but I've often heard politicians over the years say, I'm standing down now because I want to spend more time with my family. Are you sure your family wants to spend more time with you?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Steve, I'll also tell you, and I think, my colleagues would understand this. When you go into a campaign, you leave your family for about 2 months, right? It's like you have your breakfast, you come home late at night for dinner, but for most of the day, you're gone. And so while I think all of us probably love campaigning because we're talking to our constituents, it's particularly hard on your kids and your wife. And, it's starting right now. So all those councillors and elected officials right now, they're starting to pound the pavement the day after Labor Day, and they're not seeing their families. It's a stressful situation, so you need a very understanding family. I
was, of course, being facetious. I'm sure your family's going to be thrilled to have you around more often.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. We'll have to wait and see. Okay. That's an open question.
We'll get back to us on that. I did talk to Mayor Therrien a moment ago about some of the hostility she received while she was in office, and the very notable response that she made on social media to get some of those people off her back. You've had the same kind of stuff happen. And I want to put this, Sheldon, top of page 2 here. Your office sent us some tweets that you have received. And here's one of them. And, this being a family program, we're going to blur out some of the rougher language. But here's somebody saying, deeply enjoying the replies to DMW's, Denzelman and Wong's tweet about not running again. Such an F face and so deservedly hated. See you in hell. How much of this is now just a regular everyday occurrence in the job of a local politician in this province?
It happens far too often. It has changed over my, career, 28 years at City Hall. Dave Chappelle referred to Twitter as, I think, the bathroom wall of the internet. And, after a while, kind of get used to it, but you never really do. It's hardest on your family when they see these type of posts. But people feel free to say these things these days, and they're not as respectful of other opinions. And I think that a lot of folks would look at that and say, I don't want any of that nonsense, and they won't run. And it's bad for the democratic process.
Mayor Therrien, there is absolutely no question whatsoever that social media is harder on female politicians than it is on male politicians. I think that is a given. Having said that, what do you think? I mean, you've been through it. What advice would you give to your successors? And presumably there will still be women on Peterborough City Council after the next election. Is that right?
I hope so. We do have some fabulous candidates running. It is unfortunate, though. I have talked to numerous women who wanted to run, but sort of see the kind of toxicity and vitriol on social media, especially, which again isn't direct to women, but there's sometimes a different flavor towards women. And they said, I'm not going to do that. And so I'm hoping that there's some of the good candidates that are running do get elected.
So what advice would you give them? Because
there is, I think, women running in pretty much almost every ward.
What advice would you give them on how to handle the kind of garbage that they too often encounter on social media?
I mean, you got to be tough. I think that, there's some members of the council that just don't use social media. It's sometimes a generational thing. It's hard to avoid when you're younger. But I would just say, if you can get somebody to, I turn off replies to some tweets because I just don't need to deal with the anonymous bots, which is the majority of that kind of stuff. Have a good support network around you that will, that you can kind of laugh about it. Like I have archived a lot of these tweets and emails. They're going to go in my memoir. They're like, in 5 years, I'll look back and laugh at it. But the advice would basically just be like, if you're pissing people off, you're doing the right thing. And you're never going to make everybody happy. So just stick to your morals and your integrity, and people respect that more than if you try to please everyone.
Did you find those kinds of ugly comments particularly debilitating to your efforts?
I mean, in some ways, the bigger challenges was dealing with like internal council politics and ego, less so than because the people throwing shade on social media, I don't know them. A lot of them don't live in Peterborough, so they don't really matter. But it's the dealing with the internal politics of council, which we can all relate to, is the biggest challenge, for sure.
Mayor Jaworski, I guess all of us are hoping that 4 years down the road, in other words, not this municipal election coming in October, but the one 4 years hence, COVID is going to be, we hope, more under control. And I wonder whether you think that it's possible things may go back to quote unquote normal, whatever that looks like, and therefore the really, really tough aspects of your job may start to disappear over the years.
Steve, I'm not sure that will take place. We're going to look for a new normal for sure, just based on climate change and climate change adaptation. The world is continuously changing. If you roll back 10 years or 20 years, you'll see radical differences, and we're going to continue on with that. But certainly we'll have COVID in the rearview mirror, and we can look forward to making sure that we create a great place. My experience has been a bit different. I've been blessed with a wonderful council, 5 women, 3 men, and 4 of my councilors had kids aged 10 and under when we were elected. And I really think that's a wonderful council and a great way for decision making. And I think what really bothers me about the old days of the keyboard warriors who are after you on Twitter, that we're now seeing that evolve into in-person things. So things that you wouldn't say before to a person's face, you'd say on Twitter. And that seems to be evolving rapidly over the past 18 months. But if I was to give advice to people who are running for council, it's don't engage on Twitter. Put out your own messaging, and if something comes back very harsh, just leave it alone, and you'll learn from your experience on how to deal with those things.
Well, let's pick up on that. Let's spend a few minutes here just talking about, because we see this all over the province. There are lots of places where lots of politicians are being acclaimed, No one wants a job. No one wants to run against them. This has, for all of the reasons that you've already described, this has become a very tough job at a very tough time. Denzel, start us off here. What could be done to make the job more appealing so that maybe more people will want it going forward?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of discussion about the compensation packages that some councillors receive. That could be made better, and you might be able to get different councillors.
Now, having said that, you make more than an MPP does.
I don't know. How much does an MPP make?
I think you make 125, and I think they make 110. Now, of course, they get extra if they're in cabinet or if they're in a parliamentary assistant or on a committee or something. But the base salary of a member of the Ontario legislature is less than a Toronto City councillor. That's not to say you're making too much. Might be an argument that they're making too little. But anyway, I interrupted.
Well, I think that's an interesting discussion to look at. Are people not signing up because of the compensation? For me, it wasn't an issue. It's more about public service. Incumbency is a very strong tool or benefit that incumbents have. So running against an incumbent becomes a real challenge. And so addressing that, should we look at term limits? We might have to revisit that, given, as you say, so many people are not running again, or so many people so many candidates don't have competition. That's because maybe they don't think they're going to have a chance. So why even bother? There's the civility in the electoral process. It can be a pretty mean place. We've already discussed that. So there are a number of factors in there. I think that, and the other thing that has been talked about before, Steve, not recently, is you could actually have term limits sort of imposed or by having political parties. So political parties would, I think, give a shelf life to a councillor because it'd be belonging to a political party. And I think you'd have a cycle of new councillors coming in more frequently.
Mayor Therrien, let me pick up on that term limit angle with you, because I saw you nod your head when Denzel mentioned term limits. You only served one term as mayor, so even if you had a term limit of 2, you could have gone again. Do you like the idea?
I love it. I've spoken about term limits since day one. I did one term as councillor and then one term as mayor. I beat incumbents both times, so it is possible. But I always said too, when I first ran for mayor, if I do this, it will only be for 2 terms, because I strongly believe in having term limits. I think the other thing, the compensation piece that was touched upon, historically, council was a volunteer commitment. If you go back to the days of yore, which limited who could run, and there's still, I find, a holdover in that attitude of, yes, it's public service, but it is a job. And so when you're paying councillors who, again, are mostly part-time, in Peterborough, I would love to see 1 full-time councillor per ward instead of 2 part-time councillors per ward. But when you're paying people less than a living wage to do that, it precludes young people, poor people, single parents from wanting to run or being able to run. If you need to pay for childcare while you're campaigning, if you then need to pay for childcare while you're sitting on a police board meeting for 8 hours or council meeting for 8 hours, and all your wages are then going to that, it's not worth it. And I've had many people talk to me about that they would like to do it, but it's just not worth their time. Especially when you look at all the different responsibilities that are added on, and then on top of the toxicity that we've talked about.
Those are some good suggestions that I hope somebody in the provincial government is listening to and may make those changes to make the next generation of politicians maybe take a second look at this job. Diane Therrien, Denzel Minnan-Wong, Dave Jaworski, I want to thank the 3 of you for coming onto our program and sharing your views tonight. Be well with whatever comes next for all of you.
Thanks very
so
much.
Thank you, Steve.
October 24th is Municipal Election Day in Ontario, but between fears about lower voter turnout and now a string of veteran politicians opting not to run for re-election, is it time to worry about the state of local democracy? Let's ask. In Mono, Ontario, Ellen Sinclair. She's Executive Director of the Rural Ontario Institute. And here in the provincial capital, Meyer Semioticki, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at Toronto Metropolitan University, and political commentator and consultant Seher Shafik. And it's great to have you three on our program tonight. Seher, I'll put you to work right away. You know, we've seen already on the program tonight talking about the fact that many councillors, mayors, trustees, and so on are opting for an exit from public life. The city council in the capital city of the province is losing almost a third of its members. I can't remember the last time that happened. What do you think's going on here?
I think there's a few things that are going on. The pandemic definitely has torn apart the very basic fabric of our society. And when you think about what it takes to run for office, you need to be able to tap into your networks to fundraise, to ask for volunteers, even to get votes. And so we're emerging from 2 years of complete disconnection from our communities. And we also know that community engagement precedes formal political engagement. So that could be one factor. There's also been a documented rise in polarization and what you would call toxicity in our political sphere. There's been rocks being thrown at the Prime Minister. There's been death threats for some candidates and sitting councillors as well. And I think that can turn a lot of people off. And it's important to recognize that this is happening. And then lastly, one thing that could be a factor is the increased workload specifically for Toronto city councillors. So a lot of the people that have decided not to continue as city councillors have cited family reasons and work-life balance. And cutting council to 25 seats increased the size of the ward, which increased the services that need to be provided to a larger population, and that increases workload. So that could be another reason why we're seeing less people run for city council.
Let me pick up on that last point. Meyer, I saw you nodding your head at that. You know, it's a reference, of course, to Doug Ford. One of the first things he did as Premier was almost cut Toronto City Council in half. What impact do you think that's had on the fact that so many are now not running for re-election?
I think Seher has nailed it. I think the downsizing of Toronto City Council has had a very negative impact on the fabric of local democracy in Toronto. I'm sure in the course of the conversation we'll make clear this isn't just a Toronto phenomenon. It's going on across the province, these warning signs about diminishing democracy. But the downsizing of council from 47 to 25 had a number of very negative consequences. As Seher has said, the workload increased dramatically. The ability of local councillors to connect with their residents, to connect with grassroots, has been majorly impeded. They've just got way too many, too large a population to represent. And a number of the councillors have said, I got into this to connect with my local communities at street level, neighborhood level, and I can't do that anymore. The other factor not to be lost here is the cost of running for local elected position in a city like Toronto. In the last election, 2018, the mayor spent over $2.5 million. Councillors typically spent upwards of $100,000. And that's a chunk of change to have to mobilize and be personally on the line for. There's no political party backing you up at the local level. So I'd say it's had a very negative consequence.
Ellen, let's get the sense from rural Ontario, because you certainly don't hear the story in rural Ontario that our constituencies have gone from, say, 50,000 to 120,000, which was the case at Toronto City Hall. So what would the explanation be there?
So I go back to Seher's first comment, and that is that I think the pandemic is probably the biggest influence on local politicians' decisions not to run again. You know, they went into office in 2018, and the pandemic was nowhere on the horizon. No one expected anything like the decisions that local councillors were going to have to make, closing municipal services, closing town halls, possibly laying off staff, making decisions around vaccine mandates, mask mandates, controversial decisions that were, not expected, and frankly exhausting. So these are small rural councils making big decisions for their communities, and frankly tired of sort of facing public scrutiny, which was really heightened during the pandemic. Just exhausted.
Let me follow up on that angle, Ellen, because I take your point that some of the decisions they had to make were clearly not on the horizon, and decisions they didn't expect to have to make thanks to COVID-19. But tell me more about the blowback. What kinds of things would, municipal officials in villages of 500 to 1,500 people, what kinds of things would they be hearing from constituents that under normal circumstances they never would have heard?
A lot of the same issues that the urban centers councillors are hearing, except that in rural towns and smaller communities, they're much more accessible. So councillors are walking down our main streets and we know them. We meet them in the grocery stores. Arguably, these smaller councils, smaller municipalities, sort of face that visibility that larger centers don't. So that's a sort of immediate access to councillors in small towns that I think was, the blowback wasn't, I don't think, any different. It was just the accessibility of rural councillors that may be a factor at play.
Meyer, could you speak to the issue of respect? Because, this may or may not be true, but you often hear it, that the federal government, that level, tends to get the most respect, then provincial, then municipal. Municipal government is often seen as sort of the poor second cousin we keep in the corner. Do you think that's part of what's going on here?
No, actually, I don't. Well, yes and no. I'd say from the vantage point of the public, I think the public has a high regard for the services and quality of life that is determined by their local government. We regularly do a public opinion sampling of the Canadian public's perception of the services they get from government. And inevitably, the runaway top service regarded by the public is the fire department. Now, that, of course, is a municipal service, and it may well be that the fire department hasn't come to our homes, one hopes, for a long time, if ever, but one's able to sleep at night knowing that there is a fire department. And similarly, if you look across the level of responsibilities of local government, I think the public recognizes that from transportation to libraries to parks to water, etc., that the decisions coming out of local government and planning and land use, of course, are really, really important at the local level. So I don't think it's an issue of whether people think it's important enough. I think the couple of challenges that municipalities face is, one is a problem of understanding how local government operates and works. It's a different kind of political arena than the parliamentary, federal, and provincial system. There are agencies, boards, and commissions all over the place that can confuse the public. Elections that I imagine we'll get to in a moment are really hard to figure out at the local level. And then maybe a last point I'd make is the respect problem is coming from provincial governments. I don't want to single out only Ontario. This is a nationwide problematic that from our constitution of over 150 years ago, we are saddled with a set of rules that make municipalities completely dependent on their provincial governments. And in recent years, provinces have really been bigfooting municipalities, just really interfering with both the decisions that local councils make and how they go about making those decisions. And that needs to end if we're ever going to have a semblance of local democracy.
Well, let me pursue that with Seher, because it was less than a month ago that the Association of Municipalities of Ontario held its annual meeting for the first time in a few years in public, and everybody was very happy to be there and rubbing shoulders with each other again. The Premier showed up. Every cabinet minister showed up. It certainly conveyed, Seher, the impression that the provincial government cared a lot and respected the local level enough to want to come out in force. And of course, the opposition leaders were there as well to make speeches and rub shoulders as well. So talk to us about respect and the issue of whether you think a lack of respect from the province to the local municipality is really a thing.
I would say that actions speak loudest here. And while there was a lot of attendance at this forum, I think the decision to cut Toronto City Council in half, this is the fourth largest city in North America. That's to have 25 councillors representing the fourth largest city of North America it's a big decision, and to me it indicates a lack of respect, to be very frank.
Ellen, what's your view on that issue of respect?
Yeah, I have to say that of the three levels of government, municipal government is probably I don't know if respect is the best term, but from the voters' point of view, I think, again, I go back to that issue of accessibility. We're on a par with our councillors, as opposed to our MPPs and our MPs. We can call our councillors up on their cell phone. So from that perspective, we're a little more familiar with our municipal government. But from the top-down perspective, so Meyer alluded to provincial sort of oversight and provincial overriding of municipal decisions. So councillors are at the table making development decisions or municipal decisions that they think are sound, and they get overridden by provincial ministry zoning orders and things like that. So I think from both ends of the spectrum, municipal government is just a little lower on the totem pole.
Well, Meyer, okay, let me pursue that a little bit. I've talked to lots of local politicians over the years, and I must confess, I can't recall one who's ever said to me, you know what, Steve, I'm not running again because those damn fellas down at Queen's Park are always overruling our decisions. That's never come up. You really think this is a thing?
Yeah, I think the tide has turned. We've several things. Ellen has mentioned ministerial zoning orders, which the province has embarked on to, as it wishes, overturn specific zoning and planning decisions. So that's a whole new trajectory and initiative. It's interesting, you mentioned, Steve, the provincial government's appearance at the AMO's convention. More recently, AMO, of course, has come out opposed to the immediate implementation of the strong mayor's legislation of the provincial government, saying that it needs more consultation with local councils. It needs more consultation with local stakeholders. So I think we're in a new environment where municipalities are feeling more and more put upon by the province, and that there's no question that becomes a source of frustration, of disappointment. And we've now come through 2 provincial elections where no mention was made during the campaign of major changes in the works to local government operations, referring 4 years ago to the decision to downsize council in Toronto, now the decision across Ontario to really to purportedly strengthen the hand of mayors by marginalizing and minimizing the role of councillors. You take that all together, and if you're sitting on council, you may well be thinking, what's the point?
Now, that's a very fair point. Sahar, let me get you on that, because certainly Doug Ford did not campaign on the so-called Strong Mayor Act that he's about to that the legislature has passed. And I guess one of the immediate reactions was the mayor of Ottawa said, I don't like this, and I never asked for this. And a lot of the other mayors who were not included in this, because this was only meant for the Toronto and Ottawa mayoralties, a lot of other municipalities said, hey, how come only them and why not me? So maybe can you pick up that baton and run with it there on whether or not this Strong Mayor's Power Act has caused more problems than it's purported to solve?
I really struggle with this rhetoric around strong mayors, and I actually think that the act was named in a bit of a misleading way. It references building homes, and the act, in fact, is not just about building homes. It's about control that mayors have over budgets, over a bunch of different things, including appointing chairs to various committees. And I think the decision to name it about building homes was a political decision on the part of the provincial government. On the issue of is a strong mayor's system good for local democracy? I think it needs, the act as it is needs some checks and balances. Does the mayor really need to be have the ability to choose the chairs of various committees? Probably not. I mean, you can debate that as much as we like. But the fact is that Toronto is the 4th largest city in North America, and until now we haven't had much control over our budgets. I remember back in 2017, Mayor John Tory wanted to impose tolls on the Gardner and the DVP as a form of revenue that was very much needed for the city. And whether or not you agree with that policy or not, the fact is it would have brought in a lot of revenue and impacted the city's budget significantly. And at that time, Premier Kathleen Wynne shot down that idea, and it was never to be seen again. So I think that, we can talk about strong mayors, but there is a broader conversation here to be had about strong cities and what powers over our budgets a city like Toronto should be having, given how complex the residents' needs are, how many public policy issues are so pressing, and the impact that a budget in the city of Toronto can have. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some of the things that I think about when I read about the Strong Mayors Act.
Gotcha. Ellen, I wonder if I could put this to you, and in doing so, I'm hoping that I'm not going to sound completely naive and ridiculous here in doing it, but let's just, for argument's sake, say that there's an argument to be made that maybe there is so much less interest in the municipal level of government. We know turnout is much less in municipal elections than it is for provincial or federal elections, and that's really saying something given how low the turnout is there lately. Do you think it's possible that more people are not actively engaged in municipal politics and so many fewer seem to be interested in running because there's contentment? People are essentially content with the way things are going, and therefore they don't feel they need to engage that much more.
Absolutely. You see a lot more engagement in regions, communities, areas that have issues. So when we have acclamations across, different communities, that can often be because, the current slate of candidates or mayor is doing a good job. People are satisfied with what's transpiring in their community. I don't think that is a sort of a common theme across Ontario. I think things bubble up all the time in different communities, in different areas. And so you start to see a little more engagement, a little more activity among the voting electorate, the voting public. Yeah.
Well, Meyer, let me get you on that because, okay, maybe 30 people are running for mayor of Toronto, but there are lots of smaller municipalities around this province where incumbent mayors are being acclaimed. Nobody's running against them. What do you think that signals?
Well, I think it signals a disconnect of local populations from their local elected government. I think it takes me back to Sahir's opening comment about a general sort of public state at this stage of the pandemic of people having been isolated, having been really sort of self-enclosed and cut off from communal and organizational involvement. So I think that's a big piece of it. But I would not say that acclamations, and it's true, like just to give a sense of the scale of this, 15 municipalities near Ottawa are acclaiming their mayor. Some of those acclamations are people who are the only candidate who stepped up to throw their hat into the ring when an incumbent mayor did not run for re-election. So, that kind of tells you, like, this isn't a vote of confidence, it's a vote of distancing and a degree of alienation from political institutions and local government. We haven't talked much about school boards. In the last 2018 election, colleagues and I did a study of school board elections. 1/3 of all trustees in Ontario were acclaimed. I'm sure many of them did wonderful, responsive jobs on behalf of their residents, but did all of them? I doubt it. It's a warning sign about a lack of connectedness, a lack of engagement that really should set off alarm bells about the well-being of local democracy.
In which case, Sahir, in our last minute here, let me pick up on that word alienation that Meyer just used. If we want people to be less alienated from their municipal governments, give us an idea or two of how they can help make that happen.
I think being involved in local community work, the academic literature shows that being involved in communities precedes formal political engagement. So any ways to get involved with the neighborhood or interactions with local city councilors or candidates, ideally those candidates are coming to communities and really engaging with those communities where they're at. I think that could make a really big difference, not just during election cycles, but also in the 4 years in between.
Ellen, last 30 seconds to you. Same question.
Yes, get on local boards, get on not-for-profit boards. They rarely turn people away, and it's a great training ground for process, understanding procedure, process, understanding the political process.
Gotcha. Thanks for your wisdom, you three. Ellen Sinclair, Seher Shafiq, Meyer Semioticki. Great to have you all on TVO tonight. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
In barely a month and a half, Ontario voters get a chance to elect municipal governments of all shapes and sizes across this province. Are they tuned in yet? When we have such questions, we like to turn to the artificial intelligence pollster known as Polly for answers, and that means we're joined on the line from the nation's capital by Erin Kelly, the CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc. And it sure feels like I was just talking to you a few months ago about provincial politics, Erin, and now here we go on local politics. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Excellent, thanks. Well, they say that the campaigns don't really begin in earnest until after Labor Day, and that's where we are now. So, how much engagement, now that we're after Labor Day, are you seeing, or more accurately, is Polly seeing right now?
Well, I was actually quite amazed. I went back 3 months, so I looked over the summer holidays, because usually people, when they're at the cottage, they don't like to talk politics. I was actually quite surprised, especially after what we saw with the provincial election, with the low engagement, that there's actually quite high engagement across municipalities, and people are really excited about these elections.
Any municipalities in particular that stand out?
Yes. Now, so the municipalities where we are seeing a lot of incumbents who are retiring or not running again, those are the municipalities where people are engaging the most. They're both very excited, and in some cases, we're seeing high concern.
Want to name names?
Well, the one that really stands out for me is Sault Ste. Marie. So in Sault Ste. Marie, there's a lot of people talking about the election, but there's also, in Sault Ste. Marie and in Brantford, there are people saying that they're concerned because of the lack of competition, because in a lot of municipalities, the incumbents are leaving, but they don't have a lot of people putting up their hand to take their place, that people are concerned that the people who are running have an agenda. So in some cases, and I'm not going to say which municipalities, because I mean, this is the realm of opinion, not fact, but some of them are saying, I know this person, he has very controversial views. I'm seeing in some posts, this person is a member of the Proud Boys, this person was part of the convoy, and that they're coming in and they're now running for office. So there are some concerns in some municipalities. And then you've got the regular NIMBY concerns, people who are too pro-development or too anti-development. So those are things we normally see. But in Sault Ste. Marie, we're definitely seeing a lot of talk about the candidates themselves, and in Brantford about whether or not there are underlying agendas there.
Well, I know they've got good mayor's race happening in Sault Ste. Marie, maybe not quite as good as Hamilton, which has probably got the best mayor's race in the whole province. But it's often the case, Erin, that sometimes the right wing of the political spectrum gets very energized in the lead up. Other times it's the left wing that gets very energized in the lead up to a municipal election. Can you tell which it is this time?
Yeah, we can definitely see that. And, there's too many municipalities to go through. We definitely see, like in Toronto and in some urban areas, it's a very left-leaning agenda. And in other municipalities, I think Thunder Bay is coming to mind, there are more right-wing ideology, and Polly is able to distinguish those things.
Incumbent mayor in Thunder Bay also not running for re-election, which is a bit of a theme, I would have to say, this time. There are a lot of cases in a lot of different councils across the province, 444 municipalities, where a lot of incumbents are not standing again. I mean, almost a third of Toronto City Council is not seeking re-election. I mentioned the mayor in Thunder Bay, the mayor of Hamilton not running for re-election, the mayor of Ottawa not running for re-election, exactly in your town. How do people feel about the fact that it seems that so many incumbents are declining to stand again?
Overall, people are really excited about it. People are excited about the possibility for change. So if I were to describe throughout the province, that's the overall feeling, is anticipation, excitement. There are some municipalities, obviously, where they really liked their incumbent mayor and councillors. Not to say that the other ones they didn't, but people are excited for change, because often in some municipalities, the mayor has been there a long time. In a place like Ottawa, where I'm from, the mayor has not only been there a long time, but he's had a very tough term, right? Between transit problems and the convoy, et cetera. People are definitely ready for a change and looking forward to it. And I think in cases like that, you're going to see some very different councils coming forward. But overall, I would say the mood, and I'm really surprised at how many people were talking municipal politics over the summer. It's very unusual. So I think that's exciting for, people who are concerned about the lower engagement that we've had. I think this is really kind of igniting people, and we're definitely seeing those conversations, and most of it's positive.
Now, admittedly, this next question sort of asks you for some informed speculation as opposed to telling us what Polly has to say. So I'll understand if you want to punt this a little bit, but just humor me for a second here. When we last talked, it was about provincial politics, and the level of engagement in that election was at an historic low, and we saw that more than half the people who were eligible to vote didn't turn out. You're seeing increased engagement right now in municipal elections. Can we infer from that we're going to see a decent turnout in October?
Usually that's the case. When people are engaged and they're excited, they do tend to show up and vote. And we're definitely seeing, now the one thing that could dampen that is where in municipalities where there's a lot of acclamations. So we're definitely seeing in those places where people are acclaimed, there's concern about it, there's unhappiness about it. People they wanted to see a competition. So in those cases, obviously, not everybody will be acclaimed, but it might bring down the participation rate. But overall, the engagement is much higher than we've seen in the past. So I hope that means more people will turn out to vote, especially when they're concerned about some of the people that are running. Amen.
I think it's usually about 25 to 35% turnout for municipal elections, which, that's getting pretty low. But are there any particular issues that Polly is picking up that seem to be engaging people in particular this time?
The overall theme, I did look for policing and transit and all of those things that usually people are concerned about in municipal elections. Yes, there is that transit definitely in some municipalities. The larger municipalities, definitely an issue. But overall, it's really just change for the sake of change. I mean, that is really what people are talking about. They're talking about the acclamations and how disappointing that is. They want to see more people running for municipal council, and just the feeling that we will have a change of frame of mind. That's really what's motivating people right now, as opposed to particular issues. Now, as we get closer, now that it's Labor Day, I think maybe we can check in a few weeks from now. We'll probably start to see more of those issues. Right now, it's just, yay, we're going to have change. It's exciting. And that's really what the dialogue is about.
Since Polly spends so much time looking at social media, I guess I should ask a question about the toxicity of social media and whether that is having a dampening effect on people running again. I note in your neck of the woods, there are, I think, 15 municipalities in Eastern Ontario where incumbents are unopposed, or where there's only one candidate for a particular office. I mean, that's a pretty high number. Do you think social media is having a toxic effect on having more people run again?
Social media is definitely a contributor, but what we're actually seeing is councillors are saying if people actually just kept their insults to social media, that wouldn't be as big a problem. But we are seeing councillors are saying people were taking it beyond social media, showing up to their door, threatening them at events when they're walking their dog. So it's really kind of maybe some of this fermented on social media. But a lot of councillors are saying, and politicians generally, like we saw what happened with Chrystia Freeland, it's bleeding outside of social media now to personal encounters. And that's where politicians are saying they're used to the insults, it used to be letters, all of this sort of thing. But now it's bleeding into people showing up, yelling at them on the street, coming to their house. That's where I think it gives people pause. Who would want to run for public office if you're facing that kind of personal threat.
Right. Any surprises that you think are in store for the municipals this October?
I think it's early to say, because so far it's really been people just engaging on the idea of change. And I think we need to spend some more time looking at, in those places where there are races, to see, and in those places where people are expressing concern. I think we've mentioned a few municipalities where people are saying, I'm concerned with who is running. I think that will be something to watch for a surprise, but it's early just yet because people aren't actually talking about who they're supporting as much as saying that they're excited about the possibility of change. I think we'll have to check in now that people are back from holiday and they're starting to really look at the issues and think about what they want for their city for the next 4 years.
Right. Let's finish up on the most important question of all, Erin, and that is, by Election Day, in October, in that third week of October, who will be higher in the NHL standings overall, the Maple Leafs or the Senators?
The Sens, obviously. I mean, this is our moment. This is our time.
I may need a $5 bet with you on that one, Erin. I think you might not win that one, but we shall see.
I'm optimistic.
Great. If you can't be optimistic in September about your team's chances, you can never be optimistic, so well done. Thanks for joining us on TVO, the first of, I'm sure, many visits over the course of this, our 17th season. Be well.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, September 7th, 2022. Tomorrow, what economists see ahead for inflation and wages. Also, political consultant and longtime Conservative Tasha Kiridan on her new book about the party's path to victory. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
TVO.org has a new look online. For the latest Ontario current affairs from our digital team, from The Agenda, of course, and for all of our podcast documentaries and programs, check out the slick new website at TVO.org.